Great Britain is a set of islands in the northwest of Europe. It is renowned throughout the world for many things, for example tea. Britain has played a very important part in global history to make the world what it is today. Nowadays, Britain is considered to be a very important country in the world. The reason Britain is considered to be one of the most important nations in the world today is not necessarily because it is one of the most powerful nations, but merely because of its history. In this short video, I'll be explaining some of the key parts of British history. Before I start, I would like to express that this video is not intended for a political discussion on my country is better than yours, so if there is anyone here who has come to boast about how great their country is or to hate on another country, then please leave. The first thing I would like to say is Britain is not a country. Britain is a geographical landform which consists of many islands. Most of these islands belong to one of the major nations in the British Isles. The two main islands in the British Isles are Ireland and Great Britain. The United Kingdom is a term given to Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Great Britain was formed in the Act of Union of 1707 when Scotland and England united. Wales at the time was under English control, so that also became part of Great Britain. Generally, people consider Northern Ireland to be part of Great Britain, even though the term is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. However, the Northern Irish flag is part of Great Britain. The flag of Great Britain, also known as the Union Jack, is made up of the Cross of St. George of England. This is the red cross with a white banner that consists of the horizontal and vertical line. The Northern Irish flag is the red diagonal crosses with the white background, and the Scottish flag is the white diagonal crosses on a blue background. Wales does not play a part in the Union Jack because, like I've already said, at the time Wales had already been taken over by the English. When Great Britain was made, it was decided to be called Britain after the Britons, who were the people who lived in Britain before the Romans came. It was the Romans who called the Britons Britons after they invaded, because they were the first people to set foot on the British Isles other than those who were already there. They decided to call them Britons because the Trojans, who were the first people to find Britain, decided to call it the British Isles. Before the Roman invasion, the inhabitants of the British Isles were the Gauls, the Druids, and other such barbarians. They attempted to fight off the Romans, and some succeeded in a few battles, but overall they could not defeat the might of the Roman Empire. The Romans forced all the barbarians north up to where Scotland is today, where they built Hadrian's Wall to keep them there. They also pushed all of the barbarians out of Wales, up to Anglesey, where they were eventually wiped out. This formed the start of the British Isles as we know today. As well as forming what would soon become England, Scotland and Wales, the Romans also brought their culture along. Soon the Roman Empire fell apart due to a money problem, and Britain was left. Many of the barbarians up in Scotland crossed Hadrian's Wall and came back to where England and Wales are. A large number of Romans also stayed in Britain. One of them was a man named Patrick. Patrick was captured as a slave by Irish pirates. He was taken to Ireland, but he managed to escape. From there, instead of returning home, he decided to spread the religion of Christianity around. Today he is known as the Irish patron saint, St. Patrick. As the Roman Empire fell into the Western Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire, many barbarians were now able to return to their homelands in Europe. One such group of barbarians were the Saxons. The Saxons came and took over England and managed to repel attacks from many other barbarian invaders, for example, the Vikings. The Saxon king, Alfred the Great, managed to beat back the Vikings, and he names the country England. After the fall of the Roman Empire, many Welsh clans formed and started to fight for the throne. After the formation of England and Wales, Scotland also became its own country. It stayed this way for many years, with the Welsh clans fighting for power, the English Saxons, and the Scots. For England and Wales, this peace did not last. Tensions started to build in around the year 1060. The King of England at the time was Edward the Confessor. He had promised the throne to King William I of Normandy. Edward had no heir, so the throne was apparently meant to go to William. During the end of Edward's reign, the Welsh also started having problems. You see, the last two Welsh clans were fighting. The victor and the uniter of Wales, as well as the first king of Wales, was Gruffydd ap Llywelyn. Llywelyn managed to rule Wales with an iron fist and relied a lot on his military. He succeeded in a small invasion of England and took part of England's land, making Wales the largest it had ever been and ever will be, up to today. Scotland had also gained a new king, King Malcolm. He had also taken the throne through battle. Back in England, Edward the Confessor finally died, and William expected the throne. However, someone else got the throne, a man called Harold Godwinson, who had been put on the throne by the English people themselves, who wanted an English king. William prepared an army and was about to sail, however the wind did not favour him and he was unable to cross the channel. Harold instead went to Wales and beat back Llewellyn and retook the lands that Llewellyn had taken. After this, Wales stayed the same up till today. Harold's Saxon army then heard news that the Norwegian army had landed in the north, in York, so Harold went to meet Harold Hardrada, the Norwegian king who also wanted the throne of England. At the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the Saxon army, led by Harold Godwinson, used their shield wall to defeat the Norwegian invaders, led by Harold Hardrada. After winning the battle, a messenger was sent up to Harold's army, which told him that William had finally landed in East Sussex. Now William was a Duke of Normandy in northern France, however he hated the French. William believed it was his right to have England, so he marched forth to meet the Saxon army. Harold and his Saxon army had to march north from York all the way down to just outside Hastings in the small village of Battle, where he set up his shield wall on Senlac Ridge. The night before the battle, it is believed that the two armies saw Halley's Comet flying in the sky. However, that is for a different story. The next day the battle commenced. The Saxon shield wall on Senlac Ridge managed to hold against a number of Norman attacks. William was unable to defeat Harold's forces, so he ordered a false retreat where his army started to rout. A number of the Saxons broke the wall and followed. Harold then turned his army around and defeated them. Whilst the shield wall was repairing, he also ordered his crossbowmen to fire up. Some of the crossbowmen fired at chest level, so the Saxons had to put down their shields, however others fired up and at the Saxon heads. The Saxons were unable to defend from arrows coming from both directions, and Harold himself was hit in the eye with an arrow. Elite Norman knights on horseback charged up, went straight through the shield wall and hacked Harold to pieces. The Saxon army routed and the Norman conquest had succeeded for William. He became known as King William the Conqueror of England, as he did not want to be French. London accepted this new king, as William did keep it England and only had the French court for a small amount of time. However, there were rebellions in York in the north. Legend tells of a man called Hereward the Wake who led these rebellions and was succeeded until he met the Norman motte and bailies that were dotted around the country. The Normans crushed the rebellion and then started planting more castles than just motte and bailies into stone castles all around our country. One of the most famous castles is Rochester Castle. When King William died, it is said that he was so fat that they could only put one bone in his coffin. Llewellyn was invaded by the Normans. He was also invaded by the Irish and the Norwegians, so in the end he had to flee to the mountains where he was killed by his own people. Norman law made sure that every able man was able to fire a longbow at a certain range and very well, in case England was invaded. The longbow became the proud weapon of the peasants and was used rather a lot in the next few years. Norman rule continued unchallenged, and soon the Saxons and the Normans accepted each other as brothers, as the English. England then went and accepted the Catholic Church's plea for a crusade against the Kingdom of Jerusalem. This was successful. Rather a number of years later, there was a third crusade called, as the Muslim leader Salah ad-Din had retaken Jerusalem. This call was accepted once more by the English, and Richard the Lionheart led a crusade across the Holy Lands. Originally, the English Crusaders, or the Templars, wore a white cross on a red background, whereas the French wore a red cross on a white background. However, they decided to change, and in the end, this became the modern flag of England, also known as the flag of St. George. However, that was not for a few years. The medieval flag of England was 3 lions, and these lions were not copied from the Lannisters copied from the English. The lion came to then represent England. The lion symbolises bravery that the English people are supposedly meant to have. During the Third Crusade, England was left in charge of Prince John, Richard's brother. Prince John ruled by taxing a lot of the peasants, which angered them, and there was meant to be the legend of Robin Hood, who supposedly stole from the rich and gave to the poor. After Richard's death, the throne was handed down to Prince John. Prince John ruled very badly as he taxed everyone and pretty much annoyed everyone. So there was a revolt of the barons, also known as the Barons' Revolt, or the Barons' Alliance. This is considered to be the first civil war, although not named so. It was first a huge stalemate, but in the end the Knights Templar got involved on the side of the barons. Prince John was forced to submit, and he signed the Magna Carta giving all men more rights and freedom. This was the start of freedom. Hear that, America? However, after this, the Pope ordered King John to reclaim his lands. He then got a group of Danish mercenaries and besieged Rochester Castle. He managed to take the castle, however, he was then attacked by the barons with the aid of the French and forced to submit. The first war between all of Britain started in the reign of Edward I. After managing to dispose of his barons or anyone else who would stand up to him in England, he turned his attention first to Wales. England planned to invade Wales, and Wales prepared. They prepared for a guerrilla war by hiding in the forests, the mountains, and the valleys. The English, however, just went past and took their castles. Wales was united under the English banner. England then turned its attention to Scotland. England invaded Scotland, but did not take all of Scotland because it hesitated. A man named William Wallace rebelled against the English and succeeded in a few battles. However, he was eventually captured and killed. He did not do as much as was expressed in Braveheart, which is melodramatic, just like most of Mel Gibson's films. The English retook the lands they had lost in Scotland. However, Robert the Bruce did eventually force the English out, and Scotland and England became separate again and made peace. Wales was allowed to stay as its own country with its own name and its own government under English rule. It is still like this today. The British Isles remained at peace for a while, however the next killer came from the French. It was not an invasion, it was a disease that spread throughout all of Europe. The Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague, first came from a French ship coming to England. The ship had rats. These rats were in a basket sold to some English merchants. This was normal in those days, because there were a lot of rats around. It was not, however, the rats that gave the bubonic plague, it was the fleas on the rats. In 1349, the first case of Black Death in England happened when a flea bit a man. He then coughed, and the plague became bubonic throughout the air. It spread all across England and millions died. After the plague, millions were dead. They were all buried, facing Jerusalem in mass graves. This showed that the people still had hope even after the plague. The significance of the Black Death is not necessarily the plague itself, but what happened afterwards. There was a lot more land. This meant people were able to farm more in the agriculture and earn a lot more and sell excess for profit for the first time in history. People then realized that they did not have to work in a serfdom hierarchy. They did not have to work for the feudal system, they could work for themselves. The first businesses started to set up. The king, however, did not like this, so he put a new poll tax. Everyone had to pay this tax because they were starting up their own business. Peasants did not like this, and a revolt started, the Peasants' Revolt. The peasants marched all the way to London, and the knights were not allowed to stop them because of their chivalric code. When they finally got to London, the king killed their ringleader, Wat Tyler, and told them that he would get rid of the poll tax, which he did. The peasants went home, however knights were sent around to round up the ringleaders and have them executed. The poll taxes, however, were abolished. Along with this, however, serfdom was abolished, and for the first time people were beginning to have more and more freedom in what they choose to do instead of having it decided for them. This was shown in the next war, the 100 Years' War with France. The 100 Years' War was a war for the throne of France. Because, of course, England had Normandy and Calais in the north, England also believed it had a right to France. The French also believed they had to keep their own rights. But the main reason was the French wanted to have Normandy for themselves, so they invaded. The English had 3 stunning victories in a row as the major parts of the 100 Years' War. First at Crécy, then at Poitiers, then at Agincourt. Forgive me, I'm not that good at pronouncing this stuff. All 3 of these victories were won through the English longbow. The English longbow, the weapon of the peasants, had been mass-produced in England and Wales and had expert archers, the best in the world. After serfdom was abolished, you had volunteers signing up for the war, so although England had less troops, they still had elite fighters and elite longbowmen fighting against the French. At Agincourt, it is estimated that the French army had between 30,000 and 150,000 men. Most of them were knights on horseback. The British had a much smaller force, but they had elite longbowmen. It is said that the British longbowmen could fire 12 arrows every minute. During the battle, on average, 1,000 English arrows were fired every second. This, combined with the boggy grounds the French had to charge along, and also the heavy armour they had to wear, completely destroyed the French army, and it was a great English victory, known as St. Crispin's Day, the 25th of October. After this, the longbow was for the first time in history not only the peasant's weapon, but the most powerful weapon of the age, shortly before the musket came along. And England had a huge military of elite trained longbowmen, not through conscription. Medieval England, however, started to draw to a close in the War of the Roses. The final battle of the War of the Roses was the Battle of Bosworth Field between Richard III of the House of York and Henry VII of the House of Tudor, or was also known as the House of Lancaster. Richard III himself was slain during the Battle of Bosworth Field, and England left the medieval era and became Tudor England for the first time in history. Not much changed at the beginning of the Tudor era. In Scotland, they had become Stuart. Nothing changed in Wales, still under English rule, and nothing much had happened in Ireland either. The only major global thing that had happened was the Spanish, who had now had a huge empire, had found the New World, and were exporting gold from Aztec South America back to Spain. After Henry VII's death, his son, Henry VIII, came to the throne. He was a very powerful king who ruled England with an iron fist. He had 6 wives and 3 children. His 3 children were the oldest, Mary, second oldest, Elizabeth, and his youngest was his son, Edward VI. Now, the thing that made Henry so famous was he wanted to divorce his first wife, but the Pope said that divorce was not allowed in the Catholic Church, so Henry made his own religion of Christianity called Protestantism. The first printing press, made in Germany, had come across to England and was being used to make the first Protestant Bible, which had Henry VIII on the front. This, of course, led to England being excommunicated from the rest of the Catholic Church. It became its own independent religion. However, there was the threat of invasion, as most other European countries absolutely hated England for what it had done. England had to prepare for an invasion. England, however, could not afford the cannons of the era, bronze cannons, so had to try and make its own cannons. England had a lot of natural resources, especially iron, which were used to make the gladiators of Rome, and eventually the iron cannon, the most popular cannon of the battlefield. The iron cannon was eventually developed in Sussex and Kent in England because Henry VIII feared a threat of invasion from the rest of Catholic Europe. After the mass development of the new iron cannons and the planting of the new forests, England was able to make its first Royal Navy, which it started developing. It only finished in Elizabethan times. After Henry's death, his son Edward VI went to the throne at the age of 9. He, however, died of a disease. Then his sister Mary went to the throne. She, however, tried to make England Catholic again, and she murdered all the Protestants by burning them at the stake. This led to confusion. However, when Mary eventually died, Elizabeth I went to the throne, and hence the Elizabethan era of Tudor started. She accepted both Protestant and Catholic people in England, however the main religion was Protestant. Now, the reason many people seem to think that the English had bad teeth is not because we do have bad teeth, is simply because Elizabeth I herself had bad teeth. That's where the stereotype comes from. The Royal Navy had finally finished, however Spain decided to try and invade and make us Catholic again. The Spanish Armada came, however it was eventually stopped by the Royal Navy, which had just finished being productive. Britain now had almost complete control of the ocean. So it started piracy. It went and it started pirating and stealing all of the gold being shipped from Aztec America up to Spain. This is where the English first found out about the Aztec gold, as well as tobacco, chocolate, and tea. Also, another very important thing during the Elizabethan times was William Shakespeare, one of the most famous playwrights in the whole entire world. At the end of Elizabethan/Tudor England, the Tudor era came to an end, for Elizabeth I had no heir. So, the Stuart Scots came and decided to take the throne of England, happily accepted by the English. James I Stuart decided to unite England and Wales and called it Great Britain. It was called Great Britain after the original Britons, which the Trojans had called after the British Isles. Then after that, instead of Britain going and being able to take over the world, there was a civil war, the English Civil War, against Charles I. This was between Parliament and the monarchy. Oliver Cromwell managed to lead the parliamentarian forces to victory and defeated Charles I. Charles was executed, but his son Charles II escaped by hiding up an oak tree. This became known as the Royal Oak. After Cromwell had taken the throne, he made the first constitutional monarchy. A monarchy, however, the government was run by Parliament instead of the monarchy directly. This was the first abolishment of absolute monarchy in the world. Charles II came back for his second English Civil War. However, he was defeated, and the Stuart era came to an end. Instead, Parliament let German Hanoverians come to the throne of England under the new constitutional monarchy. After a small Jacobite rebellion in the north, Great Britain was completely united for the first time in history. Then there was another war with France, the Colonial War. The new Great Britain went into contest with France by fighting in 3 different areas of the world for an empire. They fought in Europe, India, and the Americas. Neither nation managed to gain complete control of Europe. However, they had a huge influence. Britain managed to defeat the French in the Americas, finally at the Siege of Quebec. The British general James Wolfe, however, was killed in the battle by artillery. Great Britain then sent most of its elite regiments over to India. The only ones remaining in the Americas were undisciplined home guard who were not meant for fighting. Due to it costing so much to ship across the Atlantic, Britain had to put a tax on all its goods that went back and forth. The British citizens were happy to pay the tax, for they were getting new exotic things like salt and spices, things which before were only luxuries, thanks to the East India Trading Company. The American people, however, did not want to pay because they thought that they were a new people who were obsolete from paying taxes. When the next merchant ship went to the Americas, it happened to be a tea ship heading to Boston. When it landed, Americans dressed up as natives went on board and threw the tea into the sea. This started a revolution which Britain was unprepared for and could not win. Along with the French, the Americans beat back the British. Most of Britain's elite veterans of war and all its elite regiments were in India fighting. There was a small clutch of outnumbered British regiments who did, however, win a few battles, although it was not enough to claim victory against the outnumbering Americans who used guerrilla tactics. Also, Britain could not afford to send its troops supplies, so the people there were unable to get supplies and were having to fight an outnumbered guerrilla force. It must have looked pretty bad. Eventually, at the Siege of Yorktown, Britain decided to just throw America away, for it did not need it. At the Siege of Yorktown, Britain surrendered and signed the American Declaration of Independence. Strangely enough, after this, the British economy shot up through the air. Britain then went and finally dominated India, beating back the French, and the Colonial War was won. A number of years later, France decided to wage war on Britain once again, but this time it was under the command of Napoleon Bonaparte. The huge Royal Navy was stopping France from trading with the Americans. Because of this, the French decided to land in Egypt, take its wealth, and then tried to march on to India to stop Britain from trading there. Napoleon was attacked by the Ottoman Empire of Turkey and defeated on land, as well as being defeated by the Royal Navy, who were up in Cyprus at the Battle of Akubir Bay, led by Horatio Nelson. Napoleon had been defeated and fled back to Cairo. However, before arriving at Cairo, he ordered all of his men to carry up their flags and play their music as though they were victors. During the night, Napoleon fled to France, claiming that he had urgent business to attend to. He was then crowned emperor in 1804. Britain took Cairo and Egypt, and this started the beginning of Egyptology, or archaeology, in Egypt. In 1805, Napoleon was attacking the coalition which Britain had paid to defeat the French, of Austria and Russia. Napoleon gained a huge victory at the Battle of Austerlitz, defeating the combined Austrian and Russian force. The Austrians were forced to surrender and the Holy Roman Empire died. The Prussians were also had land taken away from them in Poland, even though they weren't in the conflict, and the Russians started fleeing back to Moscow. The British needed to strike back. On the 21st of October, outside Cape Trafalgar, the British Royal Navy faced against the combined Franco-Spanish fleet. Now, usually in naval battles, each ship would line up next to each other, side by side, to fire broadsides at each other. Now, you see, the naval commander of this battle was in fact Horatio Nelson, and he was a great sea tactician. A national hero after Akubir Bay, also known as the Battle of the Nile, and the Battle of Copenhagen, Nelson decided to use his best tactics to defeat the combined Franco-Spanish fleet. The Franco-Spanish fleet formed a big line preparing to broadside the British. The British, however, split into two columns, weather and lee column, and headed straight towards the French broadsides. It looked like suicide. However, as soon as the British managed to get to the French lines, they split them up and decided to fire broadsides into their stern and hull. The HMS Victory and the Redoubtable engaged. Horatio Nelson was unfortunately shot. However, he lived long enough to hear that he had won the battle, and Britain had complete supreme control over the seas. The Royal Navy had done it once more. Britain continued to pay the coalition to prepare to fight France, and they did so, however they were losing. In 1812, Britain had to take action into its own hands. Arthur Wellesley, also known as the Duke of Wellington, went to the peninsula in Portugal and Spain, and fought off the French. A British victory in the Iberian Peninsula allowed the Great British forces to invade from the south of France as well as the north across the Channel. At the same time, the Russian winter defeated Napoleon's forces, and they finally left Russia at the Battle of Berezina. Prussia and Austria then re-raised their banners, and Russia, Austria, Spain, Portugal, and Great Britain all went to Paris to defeat the French army. At the same time, in 1812, the Americans realized they were no longer the center of attention. They wanted the attention back, so they did two things. They went north and invaded Canada, splitting it in two. They also attacked a British merchant vessel. After defeating this unarmed British merchant vessel, the Americans seemed to think that they had defeated the entire Royal Navy, so in retaliation, the entire Royal Navy went to the Americas and crushed the American Navy. This began the War of 1812, which is forgotten in Britain, as not many people think about it due to the fact that it was a minor event, as our main force was fighting against Napoleon. We mainly helped Canada push the Americans out of Canada and they reclaim their land. However, once Napoleon had been beaten in 1814, Britain was able to send its elite veterans from the peninsula over to the Americas. Now, because Britain didn't use conscription, they had to make up for it by having the finest soldiers in the world. The Redcoats were disciplined to the extreme. They were hardened elite veterans and were able to easily defeat the American outnumbering forces. Together, the Canadians and the British went to the White House in Washington, burned it to the ground, and then left. The War of 1812, which went on until 1814, had finished. Historians seem to think that it was a stalemate, the War of 1812, as apparently the British pulled out. However, the British left because there was no point fighting. The Canadians also left the Americas because they had their land back. Both the Canadians and the British had got their goal. The Americans seemed to think that they wanted to invade all of America and claimed their own victory in the Second War of Independence. This, however, is false. A year later, in 1815, the peace was disturbed again as Napoleon escaped his exile on the island of Elba and came back and remade the Grande Armée. Immediately, all of the coalition reformed and decided to attack the French, the Sixth Coalition. This consisted of Britain and Prussia planning to meet in the Netherlands in the north and come south to Paris, Austria and Russia coming from the east, and Portugal and Spain coming from the south. Napoleon decided to march north to attack the British and the Prussians before they could meet. The reason for this was the British were the head of the coalition, and if they defeated them, they may be able to defeat everyone. Now, before Napoleon had been defeated in 1814, the Netherlands was known as the Batavian Republic under the French. When it was liberated, it was made the Netherlands split into two countries, Belgium and Holland. Belgium, the protectorate of the British, and Holland, the protectorate of Germany, also known as Prussia. Prussia was the most powerful military state in Germany, and in the end, when it invaded all of Germany, uniting it. Napoleon split his forces. He went to Ligny to defeat Blucher and the Prussian army. He, however, let Blucher go after defeating the Prussian army. At the same time, his second-in-command, Marshal Mitchell-Ney, decided to engage the British at the crossroads of Quatre Bras. Wellington, in command of the British forces, was wary of a flanking manoeuvre, so he only sent part of his force to engage Ney's. This ended in a stalemate. Because of this, and wary of a flanking manoeuvre, British forces went back to the village of Waterloo, where they set up on the hill named Mont Saint-Jean. This was a combined Anglo force, due to the fact that there was Holland, Belgium, and Britain all in one army. However, it mainly consisted of the British. Britain also took the farmhouses of Hougoumont and La Haye-Saint, which were guarded by elite regiments such as the 95th Rifles, the Coldstream Foot Guards, and the King's German Legion. Wellington was trying to hold out so that Blucher and the Prussians could unite with the British and crush the French. Napoleon, however, got there first. Napoleon sent General Grouchy with a third of the army to go and attack the Prussians who had come to Wavre, just outside Waterloo. Napoleon stayed with everyone else at Waterloo and commanded the battle against Wellington. The battle started when the French could not move their artillery as the ground was too muddy. Ney instructed a small battalion to attack Hougoumont, the farmhouse. Whilst the French attacked Hougoumont, which was defended throughout the day, they also marched the 2nd Corps d'Uhlans along the centre towards Mont Saint-Jean. The 92nd Highlanders fought off the 2nd Corps d'Uhlans until the British heavy cavalry, instructed by Major General Picton, defeated the 2nd Corps d'Uhlans. They then continued a bit too far and were caught in the middle by French lancers. Whilst this was happening, in a lull in the fighting, Wellington reinforced his position at La Haye-Saint. Getting carried away, the lancers who had defeated the British heavy cavalry, despite Napoleon's orders, led by Ney, launched a huge heavy cavalry attack against the British. The British fled behind Mont Saint-Jean, where they formed loads of squares. Most of the squares were made up by the brave Scots. Due to the square formation, the cavalry was unable to defeat the British, and they were eventually routed. Whilst this was happening, however, the artillery managed to move on the French side, and eventually they took La Haye-Saint. By now, gunshots, which were heard throughout the day at Wavre, had finished, and there was no sound from the French General Grouchy. Napoleon had to act fast, so he misjudged, and he sent his middle of guard unit up towards the British lines. They were constantly attacked by British who were ambushing them along the way, particularly 51st Light Infantry, and were eventually routed when the British Coldstream engaged them in melee. The British Coldstream, because of this charge, earned the Grenadier status. Just after the middle guard had routed and the French were losing the battle, the Prussians came from Wavre, and the French were utterly and completely defeated. Napoleon surrendered, and he was exiled to St. Helena. Because of his great efforts, Wellington was given a lot of land and was also made Prime Minister of Great Britain. Britain now had the largest navy in the world, as well as a hugely disciplined military and lots of elite regiments. Also, there was no superpower to stand in Britain's way, as the German states were at war, Russia was suffering, and so was Austria after their defeat to Napoleon. Spain and Portugal were also struggling, and of course the Americas were struggling after the War of 1812. France, of course, had just been crushed. Britain was now able to start the British Empire. Now, onto the Crimea War. Britain had the elite Coldstream Guard and also the British Grenadiers. There were many patriotic songs such as Rule Britannia, and everyone was becoming nationalistic. Britain was a proud nation with a very large empire. France and Britain united to go to war in the Crimea against Russia. Russia had just got out of its struggle from the Napoleonic Wars, and together Britain and France defeated Russia. Now, truly there was no opposition to Great Britain. Britain led the Industrial Revolution, creating a huge economy, as well as loads of industry and trade around the world. The Redcoats marched back and forth, colonising different areas of land. Overall, the British Empire consisted of 1/4 of the world's landmass and 1/4 of the world's population. It has also become the most internationally widely spoken language of the world. Please note I said internationally widely, otherwise that would be Mandarin Chinese, but that's not internationally widely spoken. Now, after the Batavian Republic had fallen, after the French defeat in the Napoleonic Wars, the Netherlands were made into Belgium and Holland. Now Belgium was made a protectorate of Great Britain. Germany decided they wanted an empire as large as Britain's. Germany then looked for any opportunity to invade any country and expand their empire. The chance finally came when in 1914 the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austro-Hungary, which is a combination of Austria and Hungary, was assassinated by Serbian terrorists. Because of this, Austro-Hungary waged war on Serbia. Serbia then requested their allies to come in, Russia, so Russia went to war with Austro-Hungary. Germany then helped their ally Austro-Hungary and went to war with Russia and Serbia. Now during the war, Germany used this opportunity to expand their empire. Now first of all, they wanted to take all of the Netherlands, so instead of just having Holland, they went into Belgium. Through Belgium, not only could they unite the Netherlands, they could also invade France, because that border wasn't as easily defended, because the Rhineland was everywhere else. Napoleon had made the Rhineland as a buffer for Germany. The Germans, however, made the mistake of invading Belgium as he brought the world's largest economic and military superpower, Great Britain, into the war. Britain and France allied and together conscripted a large army. Overall, from Britain and the Commonwealth, 8,900,000 British soldiers fought in the First World War. At first it was a slow stalemate as Germany carefully pushed its way through Belgium and France, almost taking Paris. However, trench warfare then changed as the British and the French worked out how to defeat this stalemate. The British and the French then fought the Germans all the way back, and eventually they surrendered in 1918. After armistice though, even though we had won the war, not everyone was happy, because this war was the bloodiest in history for the British. Millions of men had been killed, and it was through conscription. People were upset. At battles such as the Somme and Passchendaele, there were huge amounts of casualties. Overall, Germany had the most casualties, Russia and France second, but Britain still had numerous. America was also in the war, but only right at the end and didn't play much of a part. After the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was limited, and the British Empire managed to expand even more. However, in the Second World War, after Nazi Germany invaded Poland, Britain got involved. The Nazis used blitzkrieg tactics to storm through Europe. First they defeated France, and the British quickly abandoned France and went back to Britain at the evacuation of Dunkirk. The Nazis then tried to operate Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Great Britain. This however failed, as the first tactic of blitzkrieg was to take out the Air Force. The RAF defeated the Luftwaffe at the Battle of Britain, and Britain was saved. Along with the USSR fighting in the Eastern Front at various battles such as Kursk and Stalingrad, the Allied forces of America, France and Britain combined and they invaded at D-Day. D-Day was planned by the British, and so were all of the pushes to Germany. Also, the British defeated the Nazis in Northern Africa. Despite the British doing most of the work, the Americans did do a huge amount of work, and for that we are grateful. However, even though we all made it seem very happy, America drained all of the Britain's money, went into a huge economic crisis, and we lost our empire by giving it away. It is said that the British Empire finally finished in 1997 when Hong Kong was given back to China. This was the end of Great British history as we know it. Of course, Britain's legacy lives on today, and we are a very important nation in considering world politics. And because of our history, we should be proud. Overall, Britain has had one of the most rich and exotic histories compared to any country in the world. This was a brief history of Britain. Although it may seem long for you, overall it's nothing, as I missed out a lot of key points. I was trying to keep this brief and I could have gone on a lot more. I really hope you enjoyed, as this is not meant to offend anyone. This is just meant to be a nice history of Britain to show that why I'm proud, why I'm patriotic of my country, and just to show the world, or British citizens themselves, what has happened in our history. Now, before I go, I must give a quick shout out to a person called ForeverBritish English, who decided to give me a shout out. So, shout out to them, go check out their channel. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, because I put a lot of time into this, despite, what it may seem. And please don't dislike just because you don't like Britain or something. Remember, this isn't a big political fest, and I'll remove any comments like that. Thank you very, very much for watching. Please feel free to comment and rate. Also subscribe, because that will really help out. Thank you very much, guys. See you next time.